So, in our biochemistry notes so far, we have talked about atomic structure, the bonding of atoms, molecules and compounds, and we've talked about chemical reactions. And now that we've got some basis in chemistry, now we're going to start talking about the applications to biology. So, in order to talk about how these things interact with living things, we need to kind of talk about what makes up a cell. What kind of chemicals and molecules do we see in cells? First, we have inorganic molecules. These are molecules like water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and salts. These are molecules used by living things. And here we have organic molecules. Organic molecules are not only molecules used by living things, but also make up structures. So the physical structures of a cell are going to be made up of organic molecules. Inorganic molecules are just going to be used by living things. And so organic molecule examples are things like carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So what's the big difference between inorganic and organic molecules? Take a minute to answer. Inorganic molecules can be found inside organisms, but they do not have any structural component of the organism. They don't make up any structures. They're not any part of you. Organic molecules, on the other hand, make up structures within an organism. So let's talk about probably the most important of the inorganic molecules, water. Water is vitally important for living things for many of the properties that water possesses. So let's talk a little bit about water structure. If we look over here, and you look at the way the electrons are arranged, you can see that water is a covalent molecule. It's sharing these electrons between the nuclei. However, the oxygen atom in water is very greedy. It likes to hold on to those electrons really, really tightly and doesn't really like to let them rotate around the hydrogen atom at all. And because of that, it pushes these electrons to one side and it leaves the proton in the hydrogen's nucleus exposed, meaning that we have a negative charge here where these electrons are being pushed together and a positive charge where the proton's exposed. This makes water kind of like a bar magnet. And remember what we talked about with bar magnets is that opposites attract. So what you get with water is that it starts to form these interactions between water molecules, and they're called hydrogen bonds. That's where the positive end of the hydrogen and the negative end of another water molecule are attracted to each other because opposite charges attract. And because water has hydrogen bonds, it has some very important and interesting properties. Because water has this positive and negative end, we call it a polar covalent molecule. And what is really important about the fact that water forms hydrogen bonds is that hydrogen bonds give water all of its special properties. And those special properties are what allow us to be alive. Without that interaction between water molecules, we wouldn't exist as we know it because it holds our bodies together. So we've talked about what polarity is. It's the opposite charges that exist on water molecules. And the type of bonds that creates, hydrogen bonds. And I just want to make sure that you guys understand that this is between the water molecules, not the individual atoms. It is still a polar covalent molecule. It's still covalent in nature. So, polarity is important because it makes water really stable. It makes water sticky. It wants to hold on to other water molecules, and it wants to hold on to other things as well. And what we call that property of water being sticky, that it likes to stick to things, is cohesion and adhesion. Cohesion and adhesion are what are responsible for allowing water to be drawn up through capillary action. And that is what allows plants to move fluid through their tissues. This video will be, of course, linked in the YouTube channel's description. Another part of water that is really interesting because of its hydrogen bonds is because it has high specific heat. That means it really likes to stay the same temperature. Water doesn't like to change temperature. And if you've ever been trying to make macaroni and cheese, you know this because it takes forever for the water to boil so that you can cook your noodles. But the thing about a high specific heat is it's good for living things. Because water doesn't like to change temperature, we can use water's property of high specific heat to do different things. Like we can use it as a source of cooling. It's how sweat works. Because water takes so much energy to become a vapor, that's its boiling point. We can use that as drawing a ton of energy from our skin as it evaporates off, so it cools us down. And the high heat of vaporization kind of is an excellent thing for keeping environments cool. This is why areas around water are usually cooler than the general temperature. So just kind of reviewing what we've talked about. Like I said, this high specific heat makes water very stable. And for a specific definition of high specific heat, it's the amount of energy it takes to raise 1 gram of a substance 1 degree Celsius. We've talked about before that, water is sticky, and so it doesn't like to break apart, which is why it has such a high surface tension. And the other thing about water is that it's known as the universal solvent. It doesn't dissolve everything, but it does dissolve most things. So what's an example of something that doesn't dissolve in water? And why do you think that is? So let's talk about what a solvent is. When we're talking about solutions, we have 2 parts of a solution. We have the solute, that's the substance that we're dissolving, and we have the solvent, where we're dissolving the thing into. So this is the substance doing the dissolving. And this becomes really important when we talk about acids and bases. Acids and bases are solutions, and when you mix them with water, they release hydrogen ions. Bases release hydroxide ions. And the scale is 0 to 14, and acids are on the lower half of the scale, less than 7. Bases are higher than 7. Some examples of acids and bases here. And that's where we'll end.